Welcome back to another special episode of Researchers on a Mission. That's right, ROAM. I am your host, Dr. J, and of course we have an incredible show for you today. Back by popular demand, we have the founding father of the ancient astronaut theory, the man who started a true revolution, and someone who, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be doing this today. And that one and only person is Mr. Eric von Däniken. Mr. von Däniken, it is a pleasure to have you back.
Well, it is a pleasure and an honor for me to talk to you.
It's always been a pleasure for me, especially since I've been reading your book. Literally, I grew up on Chariots of the Gods. And that's what inspired me to take a good look at the Bible and realize, are these angels that Ezekiel's talking about with flaming shields and four heads, could they be, instead of angelic beings, flesh and blood extraterrestrials? And I went down the same path. And that's what I wanted to go and ask you first. When did you first realize that what was in the Bible was not necessarily angelic beings, but actual extraterrestrials?
You see, I was educated in Switzerland in a boarding school, and it was a Catholic boarding school led by Jesuits. And of course, as a young man, I was a deep believer in God. By the way, I'm still a believer in God, but the belief has changed. But for me, when I was about 16 and 17 years old, God had to have a few minimum qualities. For example, God would never make a mistake, or God would be out of time. God would not need to make an experiment, and then he has to wait the result. He knows it in advance. Or, of course, God would never use some vehicle to move from point A to point B. God is all over. So all these were qualities of God's which I had in my head as a 16-year-old boy. Now in this boarding school, we had to translate parts of the Bible, from Greek to Latin, from Latin to German. And then I realized that the God of the Bible does not have these qualities. The God of the Bible made mistakes. He made experience. He didn't know the answer. And he used vehicles to go from point A to point B. So the result were doubts in my own Catholic educations. I simply wanted to find out if other communities in antiquity have similar stories than we know them from the Christian Jewish history. So that was the beginning. I was 16 years ago. In the meantime, I'm 80 years old. So that's quite some time in the past.
64 years, and you've made a startling revelation 64 years ago that to this day is being followed. As a matter of fact, everybody knows this. A famous television show in America, probably around the world, is based solely on your work, Ancient Aliens. How do you feel that your work is now continued to be developed and researched by people who have looked up to you and look at you as their idol and as the person as inspiration?
Of course, it makes me very, very proud. On the other hand, I am still criticized, which is normal. I mean, when someone comes up with a crazy idea like Eric von Däniken, he has to accept that he is criticized. So concerning Ancient Aliens, in the meantime, this Ancient Aliens TV series has 100, it's a series altogether, they have 100 continuations. 100, this is fantastic. This is like some 10 or 15 years ago, the X-Files. And Ancient Aliens is going all over the world. And of course, I love it. It's done very, very great.
One thing I really enjoy, and I know everybody out there listening knows this, when I was watching a documentary or anything about UFOs or aliens in the 80s, for every 1 minute you would see about the extraterrestrials, you'd see 2 minutes of a debunker. Then in the 90s, it'd be 1 minute and 1 minute. 1 minute alien, 1 minute debunker. Now, on Ancient Aliens and other shows, which are on every major network, there is zero debunking. It is purely giving you the facts and letting you come to your own conclusions. So as a society, we're moving far closer to what you discovered 64 years ago.
Yeah. And again, I'm happy about this. You see, some 65 years ago, I published some impossible things. Well, Chariots of the Gods was on the German market in 1968, so that's about 45 years or something like this ago. And there, for example, I said that space travel between the stars, from star to star, will be possible. At that time, every normal scientist said, this is all nonsense. You know, from star to star, there's a distance of light years, and there is absolutely no technology to reach these light years. In the meantime, we see it is possible. Or I said, extraterrestrial were here, and they made an artificial mutation with some of our ancestors. So, on the one part, we are the product of evolution, definitely, but not only. There was a mixture at some time. So, 45 years ago, I was crashed down. See, this is completely rubbish what Eric von Däniken says, because it is not possible to make artificial mutations. In the meantime, we do it, of course. So there were so many things which I wrote in 1968, which in the meantime have become reality. And I'm happy about it. So we continue to search, and we will never end.
I'm very glad that the I told you so moment is finally coming. Obviously, you've had an uphill battle. 1968 and the 70s were far different than now. Now it's more accepting. I remember when I was in school, we were told there's no such thing as planets outside of our solar system. Now, there are over 5,000 planets that resemble Earth that we found already. Let me tell you this, I mentioned this off air. This is breaking news. January 18th, 2015, recently, NASA, this is the headline, NASA confirms extraterrestrial life does exist on other planets. Now, they didn't say they found it, but the article goes on to mention that they confirm that they believe without a doubt that there exists extraterrestrial life. They're not saying intelligent life, but the fact that life is somewhere else, clearly, as we mentioned, it can evolve, and therefore the fact that there has to be intelligent life is almost an absolute positive now. What do you think of this article?
I'm happy about it, but of course there is intelligent life out there too, because this intelligent life was on Earth some thousands of years ago, and I can prove that we have been visited by extraterrestrials. That means they were intelligent. They had space travel. And how can you prove such a thing? Look, in the beginning, some 10,000, 20,000 years ago, our Stone Age ancestors were seen from a technological point primitives. So they had no tools and nothing, and they were afraid of nature. So the beginning of the religions were always natural religions. But then of a sudden, some so-called gods have come down from the clouds. We can prove this because we have thousands of cave paintings and cave engravings, which are 10,000 years old, were all around the world. They show the similar things. Now, how can you make a difference between the so-called gods, the extraterrestrials, and the gods in nature? You see, the extraterrestrials, they were talking. They gave information. They chose a few of our primitive Stone Age people at that time. They teach them in language. They teach them in astronomy. They clearly said, for example, man, look out of the window. Do you see this little light there? You humans, you call the light moon. But in reality, the moon has no light. The moon receives his light from your sun. And then he explained them the moon dates later, the calendar, etc. All this means information was coming from up to down to us. And nature, an earthquake, a trembling, a lightning does not give scientific information. So we can be absolutely sure we have been visited by beings from outer space, and of course they must have been intelligent.
I absolutely agree. And one thing I love about what you just said is there are civilizations from thousands of years ago that there was no possible way they could be connected. For instance, South America and Egypt. They were not talking to each other. They were not communicating, yet they were building similar structures. And all of them talked about wisdom from the sky people. So everything you just said is exactly true. Now, what did you feel like when you arrived in South America, saw things such as pyramids similar to Egypt and the Nazca lines?
Well, Nazca is was one of the biggest miracles, and for some scientists, it is still a miracle. And of course, Nazca has open questions. First, that the public knows what we are talking about. Nazca is a desert, and Nazca lies about 500 kilometers south of Lima in Peru. Now, when you are down on the desert, then you see just nothing. It's a desert like all the other deserts with sand and small brown stones. Soon as you fly over the desert, of a sudden you see gigantic figures in the desert. Down there you see something like an ape, then a flower, you see a fish, you see something like a labyrinth, etc. Now you go higher and higher into the air, and of a sudden you see gigantic lines. The lines start abruptly, they end abruptly, so you can compare them with airstrips. They look like airstrips. By the way, I never said these are airstrips, but I always said they look from the air like airstrips. And there are hundreds of them. So in the course of history, we have at least 30 theories concerning Nazca, what all this was. And you can really disprove every of the theories. Now in the last 2 years, and by the way, what I say now was paid by the Erich von Däniken Foundation. In the last 2 and 3 years, the University of Dresden in Germany made some exact measurements in Nazca. I have asked them, please go out to the desert and find out, is there something not reasonable, something which we cannot explain? Is there some mineral, or can you measure, differentiate in the magnetic field, etc.? And the result is absolutely astonishing. We have some of these lines where there are strong magnetic fields under the line, in the ground. And also, they found a lot of things like, for example, arsenium, which is not normal to be there. So scientific measurements, modern scientific measurements, prove that something in Nazca is wrong. Now we still have to find what is it and why is it like that. But the fact that something is wrong is scientifically clearly provable.
One thing I love about Nazca is, of course, like you mentioned, the different shapes. You have one that looks like a monkey. You have one that looks like a spider. Then you have clearly one that looks like a humanoid, possibly an extraterrestrial. And then, as you mentioned, others that look like landing strips. Do you think that the landing strips, if they were, in fact, landing strips, were created by extraterrestrials, whereas the other things, such as the monkey and the spider, were created by humans to please the extraterrestrials?
You see, I have published a theory, and theory means always you don't have a final proof for it. You look for indications to support your theory. My basic idea was, at some time, deep in the past, a mother spaceship was surrounding our planet. This is not a speculation, because this is handed down in different holy books. Now, this mother spaceship, they were looking for some kind of energy, raw material. We don't know what they were looking for. But when you have a spaceship which is 100 years on the way, you need some energy. So they were measuring on our planet, where do we find energy? They found the plain of Nazca. The plain of Nazca in Peru, and south of the plain of Nazca, is full of raw material. Still, today, it's the biggest mine in Peru. All kind of raw material, including uranium. So they measured this from the orbit. Now they sent something down, maybe it was just a satellite or a robot or whatever. They sent it down to the plain of Nazca because they realized that there were no people, so nobody would be disturbed. Now something like a robot or a robot spaceship or something like a space shuttle, never a mother spaceship, just a smaller vehicle, came down and made a landing on the desert of Nazca. Of course, there was no landing strip there. Nobody was there to construct a landing strip. A space shuttle does not need a landing strip. Maybe they came to a standstill just by something like an air cushion or so. Now the robot made exact measurements for their raw material, and then the robot started again. And on the desert, what was left was a small line, just a line because the robot created this line by blowing away sand and little stones and so on. Now some of the natives may have observed that something from the sky had come down to the earth. The natives came out in the desert and they see this line of blown away sand and stones and so. And now they start to whisper, the gods made that line. They gave us a sign. And now the natives start to make lines to the north and south and east and west, large and small one, signs to for all generations, because this was going on for more than one generation. Of course, the natives always waited that the gods should return, but they did not return. And one day a priest had a great idea. Priests often have great ideas, and said, we must show them that we are waiting them. We must show them, these sky people, that we have offerings for them. And now the natives start to create gigantic figures in the ground, like spiders and apes and fishes, etc. So this was my basic idea. Of course, I cannot prove it. But what we know, as I said before, something in Nazca is wrong, because some mountains in Nazca are cut off, completely cut off. There is no top of the mountain. Somebody was taking something away, like raw material. And as I said before, in the ground we find extreme changings of the magnetic field. So something was going on there.
Obviously, Nazca has very fertile land, and as you mentioned, so many materials that could be used for various purposes. There are clearly other parts around the world that these extraterrestrials were very interested. What other countries and civilizations did you find that had similarities to the resources that the plains of Nazca had?
Well, one of the things which we can prove is Puma Punku. Puma Punku is in the highland of Bolivia, about 4,000 meters high. And Puma Punku is a temple just very close to another big temple called Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku. Now there you see stone blocks. They are cut absolutely precisely, and you see small grooves in these stone blocks. Now the stone blocks are made out of andesite. Andesite is a hard stone like granite. Some of these stone blocks were definitely moved together to make a gigantic platform. And one of the stone blocks weighs about 80 tons. Other stone blocks, and you clearly can prove this, are prefabricated. That means like a Lego game, you can put the blocks together, and when you have them together, you create a wall. Now, officially, we say all of this was done in Stone Age time. And in Stone Age time, up there in the highland of Bolivia, the Aymara Indians were living. But the Aymara Indians were Stone Age people. They had absolutely no possibility to polish, to cut a block in such a precise way as we can prove it in Puma Punku. They had no planning to make prefabricated blocks, but there are prefabricated blocks. There were no tool, because you need a tool which is harder than granite. Otherwise, you cannot make a groove into a tool, and the groove just a few millimeters deep, absolutely precise. So something technologically was going on up there in Stone Age time. About 400 years ago, the Spanish conquerors arrived to Puma Punku, and they were standing before these gigantic stone blocks. And the natives were there too. including the ruler at that time, an Inca ruler. And the Spanish asked the natives and the Inca ruler, what is this? Not even we from Spain, we would be able to create something like this. And the ruler of the Inca said, we did not make this. It was the gods who made it in one simple night. Now, which gods again? Again, I came back. We have a mother spaceship in orbit. From the mother spaceship, smaller vehicle came down. These extraterrestrials, they are looked by the natives like gods. Now, of course, they are not gods. They just are called the gods. And they behave themselves like today's ethnologists would do. They watch and teach, and they make their photographs of a few natives. Of course, the extraterrestrials, they have their equipment. Today, our ethnologists, they have their equipment like photo apparates. They have all kind of technological equipment. Now, you do not want to bear along this equipment all the time with you. It's heavy. So you make something like a simple base camp. When our mountain climbers, they go to the Himalaya, they have base camps. In the base camps, you deposit your equipment which you do not need on the top of the mountain. The same thing for extraterrestrials. With their technology, they made a base camp where they deposited their high technology equipment so that it could not be destroyed neither by the animals or by the natures. After a few months, their work was done. They disappeared. They took their stuff with them again. And the rest was the base camp. And only now the natives came and stand before these walls and before these stone blocks and say, this was done by the gods. Now again, the natives are waiting that the gods return. And now the natives start to construct a temple. So in Puma Punku, you can clearly differentiate between two technologies. One is a technology out of Stone Age time, which was not able to have been made by the Aymara Indians. The next are temples, normal temples, which were definitely constructed by the natives.